Let's ask some people who have been studying Xi for a while. Author of The Strategy of Denial, Elbridge Colby is with us from the Heritage Foundation, and Michael Pillsbury, author of The 100-Year Marathon. Michael, let's start with you and get your take on this. Who is this man? Do you believe that this threat is real? I believe it's probably fairly imminent, meaning within the next year that this Taiwan issue will be resolved and President Xi will take it over. Am I wrong?
To some degree, you're wrong. Yeah, I can tell you what President Trump thought of Mr. Xi. Trump spent many hours with him, negotiated some really tough agreements. The Chinese side used to say about President Trump that he was super smart. They, in some sense, feared him. President Xi can deploy a worldwide group of lobbyists in every major capital in the world, including Washington, D.C., and he does that. The Xi Jinping I've been studying knows how to manipulate information and create groups that support China. So, yes, we can list 20 or 30 things that China does that are really bad, starting out with COVID, technology theft, Taiwan threat, you name it. But what Xi Jinping does with these units he has around the world, he fights back against the China threat theory. He says, we love Confucius, we want peace, stick with us. And then he rewards the people who are cheerleaders for him. He rewards them with money, sometimes very large amounts in $100 million or more. So you're dealing with somebody who's very shrewd. He appeals to the hawks in China. He used to be a reformer. New York Times had a very famous mistake one time when they said Xi Jinping is going to be the reformer of China. That's because he did bring a lot of money in to the provinces where he was the leader. But he also has a second side that he brings up ancient proverbs. He brings up all the old emperors and how they were overthrown. And in these proverbs, he leaves the impression that over the next 10 or 15 years, China is going to do the same thing, overthrowing the old Americans. So this is a scary part of Xi.
Let me interrupt you if I can.
The number of references to his ancient past.
Okay, but he talks constantly about reunification. It's not reunification. He wants to take over Taiwan. So that's issue number one. And he didn't say this during the Trump years. And he's openly threatening our Navy and our military and any military on the face of this earth. He's openly threatening them that if you side with Taiwan, that they will destroy you. That didn't happen during the Trump years. Donald Trump's not president right now. Joe Biden is. Yeah. So he seems more committed to fulfilling his territorial ambitions, and I believe emerging as the world's dominant leader because America's abdicated that role under Joe Biden. Am I wrong on that point?
I think there's a huge difference between Trump's approach and Biden's approach. But don't forget, President Trump had to fire his Secretary of State, his Secretary of Defense, 2 national security advisors, because in part they had the wrong idea on China. Trump was a solo sort of hero to take on China and reverse previous years of policy. I think Xi Jinping saw that, and Xi Jinping thought that the Congress is his only hope. If he can block new legislation, which the Chinese have done, no really good legislation has passed the Congress in the last 7 or 8 years to deal with the China threat. That's where Xi Jinping has also been very smart. He knows how to manipulate the U.S. Congress. That's the scariest thing about the China threat. The old Soviet Union could not do that, Sean. They didn't know how to manipulate the media and the U.S. Congress, and they took it on the chin during the Cold War. Chinese are much cleverer than that, and you have to thank Donald Trump for seeing through this. He told me many times Xi Jinping is a very smart guy.
Michael, the only difference is he's not there anymore, and they're acting very differently. Elbridge, let me ask you the same question.
Congress is there, Sean. The Congress could do something about it.
Okay, so Elbridge, let me ask you, do you believe that China will fulfill their promise, their territorial ambition as it relates to Taiwan? And do you take their threat that they will destroy any country, in this case threatening directly our Navy in the South China Sea and the area, they will obliterate it? Those are not things we heard from President Xi when Donald Trump was president. And I do believe that Michael's right. And that was they feared Donald Trump. They not only feared him, but they thought he was crazy enough that he'd do it. And that fear was a great motivation for them to stay in line. They don't have that fear anymore, in my view. Who do you agree with, me or Michael?
Well, thanks, Sean. I very much agree with you, and I want to make three points. One, This man we should take as seriously as a heart attack. This is a man who has ascended an incredibly ruthless and indeed lethal political system and has consolidated control and overturned 40 years of tradition. He lived for 5 years in a cave as a young man, so we better take him extremely seriously. There's a phrase that Michael knows better than I, which is in China, in political circles, there's an anaconda wrapped around chandeliers in nice hotel rooms, which means these people are always thinking in kind of lethal terms, and that's the mindset. Secondly, you are absolutely right, and I applaud you for bringing attention to how serious and how real and how costly a Taiwan scenario or a Taiwan conflict could be. And it would not be confined just to the U.S. Navy in the South China Sea. It would probably be throughout the Pacific and indeed potentially at home. The balloon shows us that, so at least selectively, and they have a huge nuclear force. Here's the thing. The stakes are enormously consequential. You're right. They seek to become dominant. How do we know that? We can see the kind of moves they're making, great power diplomacy. We can see the military they're building, which is clearly and indisputably for global power projection, and indeed, I would say over time for dominance. They're looking at the beginnings, at least, of unseating the dollar. So what do we do here? I agree with Senator Cotton. Over time, we're almost certainly going to need to increase defense spending, but that's just going to be to keep up with the Chinese, and it's going to take a long time, and there's a lot of roadblocks. I wish there weren't, but that's where we were. And we're looking at 2027. As you point out, possibly if we're lucky, it could be 28. Nobody knows, but we have to act as if it's right now, and we cannot ignore that. And I got to say, Sean, I think you were right earlier on in the show to say this. The biggest threat right now is China, and we don't have enough to go around, and that goes back decisions 15 years. We've got to prioritize, and especially people on our side of the spectrum have got to hold the administration's feet to the fire and say, you've got to genuinely prioritize Taiwan, and that means all of us, and that's not happening, and we have no time, and time is of the essence.
Thank you both for being with us. We appreciate it.